Well, I really wasn't planning on making my YouTube channel into a Brom analyzes stocks channel. But that's what's going to happen this week. We're going to analyze a stock. And the reason we're going to analyze a stock is because this is a stock that I made some money on, and I'm basically trying to figure out what to do with it. The company is called MindMedicine. It is a company that that is trying to figure out how to make psychedelic inspired medicines. I think that's their quote. They were the first publicly traded company that focused specifically on psychedelic medicine. And I'm wearing the shirt. In the stand up, you can see I'm wearing the shirt. And I will say that I'm not sure if like any of their medicines or their drugs are actually going to work, but this is actually a very nice shirt. So they can always pivot to become a clothing company. But here's the deal. This is why I'm talking about Mind Medicine today. So I am someone who has been kind of interested in and kind of around psychedelics for, almost like 6 or 7 years now. And I've always been interested in them. And so when I saw that there was a publicly traded company that was focused entirely on turning psychedelics into pharmaceutical medicines, and this was, I believe, last May or June, I basically decided to invest. I was like, I'm going to put some money in this. And I didn't really read too much about the company. I just knew that this is a company that's focused on psychedelics. I've got some cash on hand. I'm just going to throw it in this stock without thinking too much about it. Okay. And if you're familiar with Mind Medicine, you know that over the past year, the stock has basically gone up over 10x, and it's kind of come down a little bit in the last couple of weeks. But, I'm up something close to like 10x on my money, and I own, I'm not going to say exactly how much, but I'll just say I own more than 5,000 and less than 10,000 shares. So you can do the math. It's, a low 5 figures amount. And I'm basically trying to figure out, what do I do now? Do I hold on to this company for the next 5 years and hope that some of its medicines actually make it to market? Or do I just, take my money off the table and, cash out? So this is basically a video diary of me thinking through this company and trying to figure out what the deal is. Do I believe in it over the long term, or was it, just a fun trade? And something to keep in mind is that since Mind Medicine has IPO'd, there have been basically the floodgates on psychedelic companies have been opened. And there are now a ton of other companies out there that are doing psychedelic research and trying to create psychedelically inspired medicines. Many of them are public. There are also quite a few of them that are private and may become public soon. So the space has gotten a lot more crowded. And it's not just a question of, are you going to invest in MindMed or are you going to invest in nothing? There's tons of alternatives. The space overall seems very frothy and kind of questionable. And then there's like certain things about Mind Medicine that are weird. Now, just kind of a high level, this is sort of my position on MindMed. I do like the company. I think that it does have a somewhat solid drug development pipeline when you contrast it with other psychedelic companies. But I'm just going to say it up front. There are some incredibly kind of shady and weird things that the CEO of this company has done, and some things that I, quite frankly, don't really like. And some of them you can look at in a possibly positive light, and you can understand why he might have done these things. But they certainly don't make me like more excited to hold onto the stock. And so basically, the big theme of this video is going to be me weighing the positive attributes of this company, which is its drug pipeline and some other things about it, versus these kind of like questionable, sketchy things about it. And I've sort of got to decide, what am I going to do? Like, does the good outweigh the bad? But first, I just want to say that, obviously, like, this is not financial advice. This is just a guy talking into a microphone. And, my background is in finance. I'm a CFA charter holder, and I have worked at hedge funds for over 7 years. That said, even though I have professional finance experience, I've worked at hedge funds, and I'm a CFA charter holder, I have never had professional experience analyzing individual equities. All of my professional experience has been in like global macro, futures, index trading. I've never specialized or spent really any time on analyzing individual equities, much less biotech stocks, and certainly not penny stocks. So analyzing, when it comes to biotech penny stocks, I basically know as much as the average person. So my credentials are not really helping me here. And I just want to make that clear. So please do not buy or sell or make any decision about this stock or any other stocks in the psychedelic sector based on what I say in this video. That's all I got to say. And And, I'm wearing the t-shirt, the MindMed t-shirt, because I just want to like make it clear that I'm trying to show some love to MindMed. I appreciate the fact that they're the first company to come out and just like publicly say that they're going to go after psychedelics. I think that's really cool. And I want to show that I like actually do like the company, because I'm going to say some pretty critical things about it. And man, the MindMed has like some very loyal fanboys and fangirls too. And when I've posted critical comments about the company in its subreddit, I've gotten shit on like you wouldn't believe. I mean, people have called me all sorts of crazy names just for posing very reasonable questions about the company. But let's just get into it. So I think it's kind of good to talk a little bit about the psychedelic stocks, or the shroom stocks as a whole. Just talk about the sector before we get into MindMed. So like I said, the first publicly traded company was MindMed, and they IPO'd in May of 2020. So the whole entire space is very new. There's not a lot of history. Most, with the exception of one, all of the publicly traded equities that are focused on psychedelic research are all basically Canadian penny stocks. There's one company called Compass Pathways that is traded on, I believe, the Nasdaq or the New York Stock Exchange, but all the rest of them are penny stocks that are traded on almost exclusively the NEO exchange, which is a Canadian like Pink Sheets. And I mean, if you know anything about penny stocks, you know that they're very sketchy, not necessarily because the companies are sketchy, but because there's so little volume. It's very easy to manipulate them. The regulatory requirements for them are a lot lower than like they are for the Nasdaq or the New York Stock Exchange. And so penny stocks in general, you just want to watch out for. And biotech stocks in general, you want to watch out for, because biotech companies, just the base rate of getting a drug approved by the FDA is so low that any biotech company that doesn't have some sort of FDA approval already is super risky. And the fact is that there is not a single company in the psychedelic universe that has gotten FDA approval for any medicine, with the exception of Johnson & Johnson and their E-ketamine. But that is, many people would not even consider that a psychedelic. But in the universe of companies that are focusing exclusively on psychedelics, not a single one has gotten any approval yet. So the whole entire space is like pre-revenue and pre-FDA approval. So this whole thing is like massively speculative, no matter what company you're looking at. And of course, it kind of goes without saying, the drugs that they're researching are, at least in the United States and in most other Western countries, like extremely illegal. And so not only do they have to get FDA approval, they have to work with, the drug enforcement agencies to like, potentially like change some laws. The whole sector is like highly speculative. But it does have a lot of promise. If you talk to anyone who has had personal experience with psychedelics, they are almost all like very much they hold the belief that these things are very powerful medicines that can be used to correct all sorts of issues with humans, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, ADHD, you name it. All sorts of mental disorders can potentially be treated by these psychedelic medicines. There's like massive amounts of anecdotal evidence on this, and there is lots of clinical research dating back to the 50s and 60s on this. So it does seem very likely that at some point, some company is going to get some drug FDA approved. But I just want to be clear that so far, no company has gotten anything through the FDA yet. And many of them are not even close. So I think that's an important point to make. And one final point about the shroom sector as a whole is that while there are many of these publicly traded companies, some of the best companies are not necessarily public yet. So it could be that none of these companies that you're able to buy stock in end up being the ones that make it. There's a large group called Atai Life Sciences that is private. I believe they just raised like $175 million in like Series B venture capital funding, but they're not publicly traded. You can't buy them. They have tons of drugs in the pipeline. And it may be that they end up IPOing, and it may be that they're the ones that end up, getting something approved, and they end up just like dominating the market. And all of these penny stocks just, get destroyed. So like it may be the case that the ultimate winner is not even available for us to invest in. That's another thing that we should say about the space. But now we're going to ignore the space as a whole and jump down into MindMedicine. And I'm going to go through basically everything there is to go through about MindMedicine, from the team, the founder, the drug pipeline, the business plan, all that stuff. And I want to start talking about the founder. So this company, co-founder and current CEO His name is JR Rahn. I believe that's how you pronounce it. He calls himself JR. So I'm just going to use the term JR for the rest of this presentation. So JR is the gentleman who was the co-founder and is the current CEO of MindMedicine. And I'm just going to walk through his resume. So I think he's in his mid 30s. He went to Hamilton College and he majored in Chinese. After he graduated, he moved to Asia, I believe China, and lived there for a couple years. He got a job at Uber before they went public, doing some sort of business development role in Asia. He wasn't like a director or an executive or anything. I believe he was just a mid-level, low to mid-level marketing guy there. He came back to the US, and he started a company that I now can't remember the name of, but they did get accepted to the Y Combinator Accelerator program. And if you pay attention to the startup world, you'll know that Y Combinator is basically the Harvard of tech accelerator. So this is like a good point in his resume. He got accepted to Y Combinator with this company that I can't remember the name of, but their whole shtick was that they did some sort of like financing for mobile devices. So it was like a way that you could upgrade your iPhone cheaper than doing it through Apple or through the Verizon store, something like that. And the company definitely didn't become a massive success. Like, I don't think it was acquired. And if you look them up on Crunchbase, they have like 20 employees, but they also, they didn't go bankrupt. They're still around, but they seem to be just kind of one of these companies that's just kind of coasting. So I just spilled my coffee all over my desk. So I think it's okay. I'm just going to leave the coffee there. That'll be fine. So anyway, back to what I was saying. He started a company in Y Combinator doing this digital device thing. And then he left that company. And then he started MindMedicine. Now you'll notice, like, okay, it's great that this guy worked at Uber, which is a startup, and it's great that this guy did start a startup that didn't fail, at least. It's still kind of coasting along. But this is a guy who has zero biotech experience. He did not major in anything related to biotech or science or medicine, and he has never worked in a company that did anything related to this stuff. So he is entirely inexperienced in the space. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, Elon Musk wasn't an expert in electric cars before he started working with Tesla. He wasn't an expert in rockets. So it doesn't mean he's going to fail, but it's certainly like not the ideal background for a pharma CEO. And I'm going to talk about, just for comparison, I'm going to look at the backgrounds of some other CEOs in the psychedelic space. So you look at Compass Pathways, they are the largest publicly traded psychedelic company by market cap. They were founded and currently CEO'd by a husband and wife team. The wife is a medical doctor. To be fair, she was not a psychiatrist, and she didn't have a lot of experience with psychedelics, but she did go to medical school and she practiced. And her husband, who I believe is the current CEO, he did undergrad and master's degree in psychology, some sort of like psychological studies that did have him working in like clinical situations. And he was involved with some biotech companies during his career before starting the company. You look at another company called Cybin, which is smaller market cap than MindMed, but a lot of people seem to really like what they're working on. Their CEO is a gentleman named Doug Drysdale. He's had a 30-year career in healthcare, and he's built and sold 3 pharmaceutical companies. And you look at a Thai Life Sciences, which is the big private consortium of money that is like investing in a lot of psychedelic stuff. They're headed by a guy named Christian Angermayer. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but he's a very successful businessman who he didn't go to school for medicine or anything, but he did start and sell a biotech company before, and he has also started and sold other companies. So on the actual like executive level, if you just look at the co-founder / CEO role, the guy is not, he's certainly not like the ideal pick. He's not, if you just had a lineup of all the resumes, he's definitely like not the guy. He might even be last in the stack. I will say that it's pretty fucking cool that he decided that he was going to be the first guy to create a biotech research company focused on psychedelics and go public. That's pretty cool. He's obviously excited about the space, but he just doesn't have the background for it. It's not like a confidence-inspiring background. To go further into his background, why did he decide that he wanted to start a psychedelics company? Well, if you watch interviews with him, he tells you. So apparently during his time running this Y Combinator startup, and possibly before that, JR He was like he was a total cocaine addict, like self-admitted cocaine addict, also abused alcohol and Xanax, possibly other things. This is all self-admitted. I'm not just making this up. And he basically says that he was like going hard on the coke, going hard on the booze. And some friends told him, he was going to kill himself if he kept going so hard. And he ended up having a psychedelic experience with, I don't remember if it was mushrooms or LSD, but he had a psychedelic experience that changed his life and made him realize the potential of these medicines. And then he decided to start a company that researched them for clinical purposes. So look, I'm not saying this makes him a bad guy. I'm not saying this makes him a bad CEO, but it's not necessarily the best background. You can say it's like an inspiring story. I know Americans love like a redemption story. And, maybe he'll be able to use some of that cokehead energy to really run the company well, certainly possible. And I'm not saying that any of this makes him unfit to be the CEO or that he's going to do a bad job. I'm just saying it's not necessarily, not ideal. Let's just put it that way. So I think when it comes to, founder CEO, MindMed definitely at a disadvantage compared to some of these other companies. The next thing to look at is the teams, because we've already established the founder CEO kind of weak, but a lot of that can be overcome if you have a good team around you. And this is probably going to be the shortest section of this video because I just have no way of knowing. If you go to MindMed's website, in fact, I can pull it up here, and you look at their team, I've gone through every single one of these people's profiles, and so hard to know. They all sound great from their bios. You look them up on Google Scholar and they all just seem great. And when you look at the websites of any of these other psychedelic companies, they also have, fantastic leadership. They have a fantastic board of directors, and they all have a bunch of scientists on their advisory boards that have done tons of clinical work in psychedelics. So it's really hard to know, all of these companies' teams seem sort of equally competent. Some of the people that MindMed has on their board are real legit researchers, people that have been researching the clinical applications of LSD for 20 years. And, I think the only real question is how deep do these partnerships go? Is it just one of these deals where maybe they gave them a couple shares in exchange for being able to put their picture on the website? Or is there real interaction and knowledge sharing going on? It's so hard to know these things. And you just sort of have to, say this sort of averages out across all the psychedelic companies, and it's hard to know which one is going to be the winner based on the team. So the next thing that you got to talk about is the pipeline. The pipeline is obviously the most important part of any biotech company's plan. Do they have a bunch of drugs in their pipeline that have a high probability of being successful at completing their clinical trials and getting approved by the FDA? And this is where you can make a strong case that MindMed really is kind of leading the field. So before I talk about what specifically is in their pipeline, it's important to sort of note that pharmaceutical companies, as far as I can understand, sort of think about their pipelines in three phases. There's the discover phase, there's the develop phase, and then there's the deploy phase. So the discover phase is sort of where they have a whole bunch of different molecules and a whole bunch of ideas, and they run some preliminary studies. The develop phase is where they take those molecules and they really run tests on do these molecules actually do what we think they're going to do? Do they actually treat the illnesses or the indications that we think they're going to do? And then if you have a successful development phase, you go to the FDA approves it, and then you need to have a successful deployment phase. And the deployment phase is basically just the go-to-market strategy. How do you actually get this into the patients? Every drug sort of has its unique go-to-market and deploy platform. But the point is that there's these three phases, and currently, like I said, none of these companies have any drug that's been FDA approved. So the deploy phase, no one's actually there yet. So we have to look at the develop phase. And the develop phase, MindMed, they've got some shit going on. They've got 4 major things that they're working on in their development phase. I'm just going to read them off here. So they have a trial that is using microdosing of LSD to treat adult ADHD. So this would be like you take a tiny, tiny non-psychoactive amount of LSD, basically every day to treat your adult ADHD. They are looking at a substance called 18-MC, which is a derivative of the naturally occurring psychedelic ibogaine to treat addiction. They're looking at macro doses of LSD in conjunction with therapy to treat anxiety. And they are also looking at macro doses of LSD to treat cluster headaches. So this is 2 different molecules, ibogaine and LSD, to treat 4 different indications. And they're running all of these trials in parallel. And I think this is good. And when you look at the other psychedelic companies out there, many of them have much weaker development pipelines than MindMed. So Compass Pathways, for example, remember, they're the largest company by market cap out there. And they're only working on they have one thing going on in their development pipeline. They're looking purely at psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. And that's it. Like the whole company is just focused on this thing. And, we'll get into some reasons later on why Compass might be smart to do that. But, I think that it's good that MindMed has 4 programs in its development pipeline, because the odds of any one of these things getting approved by the FDA is so low that it's good to have, multiple shots. It's good to have multiple bets. When we look at some of these other companies, like Cybin, for example, they're another good company. They only have one thing in their development pipeline. And you look at Atai Life Sciences, they're the biggest psychedelic research group, and they only have one thing in their development pipeline. So they're like, MindMed really is dominating the development pipelines. They're moving along much faster than these other companies are, and I think that's good. Talking about the discovery pipeline, remember, discovery is like before development. This is where they're just experimenting with molecules, trying to figure out what they can give to people, like what types of diseases might these things be able to treat. They have a very strong discovery pipeline as well. They have an exclusive partnership with a laboratory at the University Hospital of Basel. It's called the Leach Lab. And they're doing all sorts of research there. They're experimenting, mixing MDMA with LSD. I think the idea is that the MDMA may dampen some of the negative effects of LSD and make the trips more like empathic. They're also experimenting with N,N-dimethyltryptamine. They're also looking at an LSD neutralizer, which is a drug that you could take in case of a bad trip that would kind of snap you out of the LSD experience. And they're also working on some tech stuff. Like I think they have some kind of dosing, machine learning based dosing technology that will help practitioners figure out the optimal dose of which psychedelic to give to which patient. And when you look at these other companies, like they are obviously doing some discovery, but most of them are focused on a single molecule, whereas MindMedicine is really looking at everything under the sun. They're just going out there and they're looking at every piece of data they can, and they're looking at every molecule they possibly can. And I think that's good. So this really is the strong point about MindMed. Like they've got a strong pipeline. And I want to point out specifically, I think that I really like this adult ADHD microdose idea. And I'll tell you why. So I don't want to say anything bad about people that genuinely have ADHD. It's obviously a real thing, but I'll tell you from personal experience that there are many people in the professional world that go to doctors to get treated for adult ADHD that do not actually have adult ADHD. What they want is something to help them focus at work, and the doctors will give them the treatments for ADHD, also known as Adderall, to help them with that. Even though these people don't actually have ADHD, there's a big demand for ADHD treatments. And unlike a lot of these other psychedelic treatment protocols, like the stuff for anxiety and depression, the idea is that you maybe have 1 or 2 big psychedelic sessions. This microdose thing is a continuing process. It's like you're always buying more LSD, you're always buying more Adderall because you have to take it every single day. And so I think from a business perspective, the idea of a continuous microdose program, that makes a lot of sense. It's a recurring revenue stream rather than a one-time or once every couple of years large dose to help you get over some anxiety or some depression or something. So I think that adult ADHD program is very, very smart from a business perspective. There have been many articles written about how people in Silicon Valley are already microdosing with LSD under the, kind of on the down low. And you can just imagine that if this actually does get FDA approved, people are going to be beating down the doors to these adult ADHD clinics to get their hands on this MindMed microdose LSD treatment. That could be a huge winner, I think. And their 18MC product for addiction that's also a very big one. So just to give you a little bit of a background on 18MC, there's this naturally occurring psychedelic called ibogaine. And I have no personal experience with ibogaine, but my understanding is that ibogaine basically for some reason, is very effective at getting people to stop destructive behaviors that they're addicted to. There are countless stories of people taking ibogaine and never picking up another cigarette or bottle of alcohol again. The problem with ibogaine is that while it is extremely effective, the trip lasts like 36 hours. And it also has been known to cause heart attacks in people that have, some heart problems. And 18MC is a synthetic derivative of ibogaine, which supposedly keeps all the benefits of ibogaine without the negative parts. So you don't trip for 36 hours. I think it's like much shorter than that. And it doesn't give you a heart attack. So that's great. And I think everyone knows that addiction is like a pretty big fucking problem in the world, and especially in the United States right now. Tons of people addicted to opioids, and the drugs that people get to come off opioids are oftentimes just like weaker opioids that, still keep them on opioids. So if you can find a non-opioid way to deal with like opioid addiction, I think that's a big winner. And I think the FDA has a lot of incentive to approve something like that. So yeah, I mean, MindMed's pipeline here, to me, from my non-biotech expert, perspective, seems pretty good. But the problem comes with the deploy phase. So let's say hypothetically that MindMedicine gets approval from the FDA. What happens then? Is it just infinite money pouring in? Well, sadly, that's not the case. And this is a little bit tricky to figure out because a lot of these problems I'm going to talk about with MindMed are not exclusive to MindMed. They're applicable to most of the other psychedelic companies. But here's the gist of the issue. All of these substances that these companies are researching have been around forever, and they're not really patentable. So psilocybin has existed forever. People have known how to synthesize it since the 50s and 60s. Same can be said for LSD. Almost all of these drugs are known. They're known quantities. They've just been banned. And so, no one's been able to do anything with them. But it's not like these are novel inventions that these companies are going to be able to patent. And I am not super familiar with like the FDA, the way that the FDA grants like, approval and everything. But my understanding is that if you get a chemical that is not currently FDA approved for something to be FDA approved, you can get what is called, I believe it's new chemical exclusivity, NCE or something. And that lasts for 5 years. But after that 5 years, unless you have a patent on the substance, anyone can just start making it and, using the thing. So let's say that, MindMed gets their LSD microdose program approved. They might be able to have exclusive rights to that for 5 years. But after 5 years, it's kind of like any pharmaceutical company can make a generic version of this, can pump it out, can start doing their own research on some twist for, LSD. And I think the point is that in investing, people talk about this idea of like an economic moat. Like, do you have something that prevents other people from coming in and encroaching on your business? And in the case of MindMed, as far as I can tell, from scouring their website, from reading their management discussion and analysis that they file with, the SEC or the Canadian equivalent of the SEC, they've got nothing. They have no moat and they barely have any go-to-market strategy. Now, maybe that's just because they are, not to that point yet. Maybe they'll figure out one when they get there, but it's not exactly confidence inspiring to see that they don't really have any way to protect the profits from their, investment here. Now, you might be wondering, well, what would a good strategy for this look like? And for that, I would point you to Compass Pathways. So I mentioned Compass Pathways. They're focused exclusively on psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. So kind of a weak pipeline, just one thing. But if you look at their actual go-to-market strategy, their deployment strategy, it's quite good. And here's what they're doing. So they're not just using psilocybin from mushrooms that they found on the ground. They are they figured out a way to synthesize synthetic psilocybin that has like a very high purity standard, and they have a patent on that. So I think that protects them for 20 years. So they own the method of manufacture, and then their clinical trials are specifically, it's not just the drug, it's the drug in combination with a very specific type of therapy that they're developing. And so when they go to the FDA, they're going to have this like patented synthesis mechanism plus this therapy method that they've patented. And it's the therapy, it's like the pre-trip thing, it's the trip, it's the post-trip follow-up. All of that stuff is going to get FDA approved. They're going to have a patent on it, they're going to have a trademark on it, and they're going to require doctors and clinicians and therapists to basically pay them a licensing fee to be able to say that they are like a Compass Pathways certified practitioners of this psilocybin therapy. And so they have like a massive economic moat. They have a big intellectual property moat around their profits. And MindMed needs to figure out something similar to that. And like I said, from what I can tell by reading all of their press releases and stuff, they really don't have anything. They've donated money to an NYU psychedelic research center that is supposedly training therapists, but I don't believe it gives them any rights to what is discovered there. And like I said, none of these chemicals that they're using are chemicals they invented. They did not invent the way to synthesize them. So it seems like best case scenario is they get one of these treatments approved, they make some money for 5 years, and then, that could be it. That could be the end. So they need to figure out a better way to make money, assuming they get some of these treatments approved. And this is the case for most psychedelic companies, by the way. Most of these psychedelic companies do not really have a way to protect themselves once they get a treatment approved. And one of the interesting things about the psychedelic space is that all of the psychedelics, almost all the psychedelics anyway, they belong to the same family of chemicals. They're called 5-HT2A agonists. And sure, they all have certain unique properties, but as anyone who has done psychedelics will tell you, they're all also very similar. And so it seems like, sure, maybe, if you look at the data hard enough, there's like big differences between psilocybin and LSD. But from a practical standpoint, maybe there's not such a big difference. So MindMed can say, hey, we're the only ones working on LSD. But if some other company figures out how to get psilocybin FDA approved, doctors may just start using the psilocybin off-label for whatever MindMed was trying to use the LSD for, because all of these chemicals are just very similar. So it's a problem. And I think it remains to be seen whether any company, much less MindMed, is really going to be able to secure a moat around what they're trying to do here. Compass seems to have like a pretty good idea. It seems like it should work. Maybe it will. It kind of remains to be seen. But overall, I do think that MindMed has a strong pipeline, and they're not stupid. I'm sure if they do get something approved, they'll probably try to figure out a way to keep a little bit of a tighter grip on the money that comes out of that treatment. So now we have to talk. We're going to move on from the pipeline. We're going to talk about my least favorite part of MindMed, and this is the kind of sketchy, unsavory things that the CEO has done and the slightly sketchy, unsavory people that the CEO has chosen to associate himself with. All right, so first, the CEO of MindMed, JR, has associated himself with Kevin O'Leary. You probably know Kevin O'Leary from the TV show Shark Tank. He is the bald guy that loves to talk about how much he loves money, and his nickname is Mr. Wonderful. I'm going to pull up. There's a picture of him. And Kevin O'Leary, I believe he invested in MindMedicine before the company went public. He supposedly continues to be a shareholder / promoter. Now, Kevin O'Leary is, it's not like he's a straight out scam artist, but he's kind of similar to Donald Trump in a way. He's a guy who has made more money by playing a businessman on TV than actually being a businessman. Many of his business ventures have kind of failed. And, at heart, he's an entertainer and he's a promoter. And it's just weird to see a guy like that associated with an early stage biotech startup. I don't know that it doesn't necessarily mean that there's like a scam going on, but it's kind of, it's kind of fishy. Like, I feel like the company should be focused 100% on doing its work in the lab and not messing around with this like Kevin O'Leary character and having him go on, TV shows to promote this stock. But at the same time, I can make the argument why this is a good thing. I mean, MindMedicine listed on the Neo exchange, which is a Canadian exchange. Kevin O'Leary is Canadian. He's very famous in Canada, much more famous than he is here. And so getting a guy like that, a famous Canadian businessman associated with your company is, it's a good thing. It does attract investors. He's got big brand reach. And, when people see his name in a headline, they're going to click on it. So I understand that there is a need for these companies to, pump their stock prices up, especially in the early stages, because if they pump the stock prices up, they can use that stock for, acquisitions, buying other research companies, compensating new people, new talent. I guess the hope is that they're pumping it for the right reasons, to use it for the things I was just talking about, and not pumping it so that they themselves can sell it and, get out while everyone else is left holding the bag. Now, if it was just Kevin O'Leary that they were associated with, I probably wouldn't care. That's kind of just a one-off. But the fact is that there are some other unsavory things and people that JR of MindMed has decided to associate himself with. And this stuff really just kind of gives me pause. So there is a company called MindJar Media, and they own kind of a network of social media influencers in the finance world and websites. They have like some penny stock sites. They have some crypto sites. And basically, MindJar Media, they're a stock promoter company. So if you are the CEO of some like small company that is publicly traded, you pay MindJar Media, and they will get a bunch of like paid articles out there. And yes, they do disclose that they are indeed sponsored content, but of course those disclosures are often at the bottom and people don't really pay attention to them. The smart people do, but most people don't really know. And there's one guy in particular, a YouTuber named Departures Capital, who is paid by MindJar to speak positively about mind medicine. And not only speak positively, but to have the CEO of MindMedicine, JR, go on his little YouTube show, which he has done multiple times. I can show you an example of that here. So there's, on the right, that's Aaron from Departures Capital, and then JR on the left. They're talking about some things. And you can see, if you scroll down to the bottom of the description, it says, this is a sponsored video. Departures Capital expects to be compensated $1,500 Canadian dollars for multimedia and advertising services by MindJar Media on behalf of MindMedicine for this video. Aaron owns 61,000 shares of MindMed at the time of video publishing. Okay, I mean, look, companies do paid PR all the time. Like plenty of companies pay to get into Bloomberg and stuff. But when you click on the disclaimer of Departures Capital, it says, please read our full disclaimer on the website. You go to the website, and this disclaimer basically admits that, Departures Capital is kind of like a pump and dump service. You can read what I highlighted here. It says, Departures Capital and its owners, members, officers, directors, partners, and consultants may own shares of the profiled companies, which it may sell at any time. We may also buy and sell securities in the profiled companies, which may cause a decline in the price of the profiled companies and stock due to our selling activities, increased volatility due to our buying and selling of the profiled companies, and, key here, permit us to make substantial profits while we are profiling each of these companies, yet may result in diminished value to the stock for investors. It says, at the completion of a campaign, most, if not all, of the companies profiled by Departures Capital are penny stocks that are illiquid. They do not have much trading volume at all, and whose securities are subject to wide fluctuations in trading price and volume. During any campaign, the trading volume and price of the securities of each profiled issuer will likely increase significantly. So that's the pump. When the campaign ends, the volume and price of the profiled company will likely decrease dramatically, and that's the dump. As a result, investors who purchase during the campaign and hold shares of the profiled company when the company ends will probably lose most, if not all, of their investment. So look, they're laying it out right there. This is a company, remember, that JR from MindMed is knowingly going on his show and talking about talking about MindMed. And if you go and you look at this guy's disclaimer, he's basically says, all of these companies that I'm talking about, these like YouTube videos I'm making, they're all sponsored. I'm part of this pump and dump thing. And if you buy these stocks that I'm talking about after watching one of my videos, if you're unlucky enough to be holding on to the stock when the company stops paying me to promote it, you will likely lose most, if not all, of your investment. Now, Departures Capital, I don't want to like shit on Aaron from Departures Capital. This is his job. That's fine. He's got to make his money. And it's not just him. Like MarketJar Media pays tons of these promoters to put up these like pump pieces. I'm just picking on Departures Capital because his YouTube channel seems to come up a lot when you search for MindMedicine. And it's not like you can't really make the excuse that, oh, JR doesn't really know this. This is just some guy that the PR agency found. MindMedicine has actually been involved intimately with Departures Capital for a long time. I'm just going to go back to the screen here. This is a picture of the IPO on the NEO exchange. And I've circled there. You can see that's the guy from Departures Capital. That's Aaron. If you watch his YouTube videos, you'll see that that's him. He's standing there while the company is IPOing on IPO day with JR and with Kevin O'Leary and with a bunch of other people. So, this is a dude who makes a living doing pump and dumps, which, hey, good for him. And he has been associated with this company since before they went public. And, you got to wonder, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that MindMed is designed to be a pump and dump, but the fact that they are intimately associated with the self-admitted pump and dumper certainly increases the odds that the company is designed to be a pump and dump. But in defense of MindMed, it's not just MindMed that utilizes the services of Departures Capital. If you look at their website, they have a list of all the companies that they're paid by, and many of the other top psychedelic companies also pay Departures Capital to pump their stuff. Numinous Wellness, the ticker is NUMI. I believe I should look at the list. NUMI, Neon Mind, and MindMedicine, just to name a few, are some of the other psychedelic companies that have paid Departures Capital to pump their stuff. Now, again, just because they're paying this guy, he's a promoter, just because they're paying a promoter doesn't mean that the companies are scams. I mean, they have invested real money into these clinical trials, and I'm sure they want to like make these clinical trials go through to fruition, and they want these chemicals to be out on the market. But it's just like, it's a bad look. I don't know what else to say. It's not a good look. What I want to believe is that JR has his heart in the right place, but he understands that we live in a world driven by hype. And so sometimes you need to have some hype on your side. Both Elon Musk and Trevor Milton were both hype artists. The question is JR more like an Elon Musk or is he more like a Trevor? For those of you who don't know, Trevor is the guy who founded Nikola Motors, who pumped the shit out of that stock and then basically dumped it, got fired as CEO. It was a bad thing. But like I said, both Elon Musk and Trevor have used hype to their advantage. One of them has a real company. One of them does not. Which one is JR? I don't know. I want to believe that he's going to do the right thing and that his heart's in the right place. But one more negative thing about JR, and this is the last thing, I promise. So recently, I believe 2 months ago or so, JR sold between 20 and 25% of his shares of MindMedicine on the open market. So he still owns 75% of his shares. It's not like he dumped all of them. And, he has a reasonable explanation for this. He says, look, I've been running this company for a couple of years now. It started off like just me. I was funding it on my credit card. I haven't really drawn a big salary. And, I have a daughter and a wife, and I need to secure a couple $1,000,000 for the future of my family. And, I think that's real. I could see myself doing that. But you also don't want to see the CEO of a company, especially that is so early stage, selling off their shares. So again, does that by itself mean that the company is, bullshit and not going to work out? Probably not, but it's certainly not a good look. All right. Finally, this is really going to be, one more point on that. So after JR sold his shares, I kind of read through the filings, and it looks like JR still has about 8 million shares. The company has 365 million shares outstanding. So you divide 8 by 365, you get a little bit more than 2. So JR only has like 2% of the company. I'm assuming that because this is an early stage biotech, at some point they're going to have to issue more shares to raise more capital, and JR's ownership is going to fall below 2%. is owning less than 2% of a company enough to make you motivated to keep running it? I don't know. Well, that was no fun. I recorded the rest of the video and I then went and I had dinner, I had a drink, and I came back to watch it and I realized that the audio stopped recording for some reason for the last bit. So I'm back here and I'm recording the last bit again, and I'm quite annoyed by that fact, but I'll just try to get through it very quickly. So what I was saying before everything cut out was that JR owns about 2% of the company. They're probably going to have to issue more shares, and at which point he will own less than 2% of the company. And the question is that enough to keep him motivated? If you compare him to other CEOs of these psychedelic stocks, the people that own Compass Pathways, the husband and wife team, each of them own 14%. So collectively, they control 28%, about 1/3 of the shares of the company. And, you really like to see founders have more control, because otherwise I think they just kind of get bored. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen at JR. Obviously, if you own 2% of a company that ends up being worth, 20 billion, you're still worth 400 million. That's a lot of money. But it just, it's definitely not a good thing that he owns such a small percentage of the total outstanding shares. The last big thing to notice is that there are a lot of people that are potentially invested in the stock for the wrong reasons. They're invested in it as like a short-term trade rather than like a long-term value proposition that is going to, eventually pay off once they get a drug FDA approved. And here's what that trade is. So right now, MindMedicine is listed on the NEO exchange, which is this Canadian over-the-counter exchange. And what that means is that there are many investors, both institutional and individual, that are not able to buy that stock. So big institutions oftentimes have rules about the types of stocks that they can hold. And oftentimes large institutions that are very conservative are not allowed to own companies that are on like the pink sheets or the over-the-counter penny stock exchanges. And retail investors, many of the brokerages that retail investors use do not give them access to these penny stocks. So I believe if you use Robinhood, for example, you cannot buy MindMedicine. It is not available. And for that reason, forums like WallStreetBets on Reddit, which is the forum behind the big GameStop pump, I believe that it is against the forum rules to discuss any penny stocks. And MindMedicine in the last couple months supposedly started applying to move their trading onto the Nasdaq. And that would obviously be a big deal because, like I just told you, if they're listed on the Nasdaq, now there's a bunch of new money, both institutions and retail, that would be able to buy this stock. And the theory is that like once it gets onto the Nasdaq, a bunch of people are going to buy the stock and the price of the stock is going to go up. And people seem absolutely convinced that once the stock gets uplisted to the Nasdaq, then the Reddit WallStreetBets forum is going to be able to talk about the stock. And they are pretty convinced that Reddit WallStreetBets is going to choose MindMedicine as the next big meme stock, and they're going to pump it, to $50 a share or something. Now, obviously this is possible, but the truth is that we haven't really heard anything in the last couple of months about the Nasdaq uplisting. The Nasdaq has a lot of requirements that you have to meet in order to be listed, and it's not totally clear if MindMedicine actually meets all those requirements. It could take them, a year to meet the requirements to be listed on the Nasdaq. And in that time, a bunch of people who bought MindMedicine just for the purposes of dumping it once it got listed on the Nasdaq and memed by WallStreetBets, they might just get bored and sell, and the price of, MindMedicine could crash. So, I think that's a big problem. There are a lot of people that are holding on to this stock because there's this potential that one, it could get listed on the Nasdaq, and two, Reddit WallStreetBets would decide to meme it. And sure, like there are reasons why it might get memed and turned into the big, moon stock. The CEO is kind of like a funny guy. He's very memeable and lovable. And the stock is in the psychedelic space, which is like very transgressive and cool. But it's certainly not a guarantee. If you just say it's like a 50% shot that they get uplisted to the Nasdaq in the next year, and then from there it's another 50% shot of whether or not they get memed by WallStreetBets. I mean, we're talking about 25% probability of that happening, and in truth, it's probably much lower than that. So definitely not impossible. It could happen, but it's certainly not likely to happen. So I think that there are just a lot of people that are holding on to this stock for the wrong reason, and when they realize that reason, which doesn't actually happen, they might just like dump the stock, and that could be the end of it. So that was really what I wanted to talk about in the second half of the video. I guess to wrap up, it's just important to note that regardless of all the problems with MindMed, the truth is that the space is just extremely competitive. Biotech is very difficult, and the psychedelic biotech space is even more difficult. Like, no one has ever gotten a drug approved in this space. There are tons of new entrants coming in to compete, and any of these companies, even the best companies, are years away from any real revenue coming in. And so this whole entire space is super speculative. And, I think for me, my conclusion on this is I certainly don't like a lot of the stuff that JR has done. I don't like I don't like a lot of his behaviors and the people that he's associated himself with. I don't like that he's associated with Kevin O'Leary. I don't like that he's associated with Departures Capital and these pump and dump groups. I don't like that he doesn't have like a strong biotech background personally. I do think that his team is strong. I do think that they have a very strong drug development pipeline. But that's not enough to guarantee that they're going to be the winner in this space. So I think the conclusion that I've sort of come to for myself is that, you probably want to, I do believe in psychedelics very strongly. I'm like almost 100% convinced that in the next 10 years, we're going to see psychedelic medicines being used in mainstream clinical practice. I absolutely believe that, like, with, every bit of my being. Like, I would bet on that. But that doesn't mean that I know which company is going to be the one that ends up making money off of that. In fact, none of the companies could make money off of it. It could just be some of these nonprofits like MAPS that get treatments approved, and then no one makes any money. So I think the real thing for me is to maybe take some of my MindMed winnings and diversify them into other psychedelic holdings, so that I'm just more broadly exposed to the psychedelic space, and that I can maybe make some money no matter who ends up the victor. So those are my thoughts on Mind Medicine. Please let me know what you think. Tell me why I'm wrong. And if you enjoy the videos that I've been putting out, the number one way to support me and encourage me is to just subscribe to the channel and like the video. And if you really want to make me feel good, leave a comment. That'd be awesome. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.